Well, joining me now here on Saturday Agenda is National Senator Matt Canavan in Brisbane. Thanks for your time this morning, Matt. I want to start with infrastructure. The Prime Minister's flagged the possibility of greater borrowings to fund, among other things, urban infrastructure. Is that something that you and the Nationals would support?
Well, up here in the Courier Mail, at least in Brisbane, I also see the Prime Minister saying we need to invest in regional economies as well, and I absolutely think we need infrastructure investment. We have probably underinvested in infrastructure, I think, in the nation in the last decade, and there's lots to do. There's lots to do in our cities and there's lots to do in our regions, and that's why we've got a $4 billion agricultural white paper. That's why we've got a Northern Australian plan. This week I'm hosting a water workshop in the Fitzroy Basin about how we can get new dams built in the Fitzroy with Michelle Landry and Ken O'Dowd. The Fitzroy Basin is our biggest water catchment on the eastern seaboard. More water flows out of the Fitzroy River at Rockhampton than any other basin on the eastern seaboard, yet we've only really got one dam in the catchment of any great size. There's huge potential for our nation, and I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister is continuing the record of this government of a focus on infrastructure investment.
So no issue though with actually racking up more debt in order to fund some of these infrastructure projects, including public transport in cities.
Well, the key thing is that the projects themselves must stack up. They must make a return for the nation, because I'm not afraid of making investments which do promote economic growth and jobs. Indeed, the only way we're going to sustainably get on top of our budget problem is to promote strong economic growth so that we can afford in the future to continue to offer the great services that we are lucky enough to have in this nation. So we have to promote economic growth, and we have to do that through good infrastructure investments. I have no problem with public transport investments in cities. I grew up in this great town of Brisbane. I left the place, I must say, because I don't like living in big cities, but lots of people do. And I have no problem with us making sure people can live in cities as long as the investments stack up.
Labor suggested an infrastructure bank, but that would be funded largely through private investment, superannuation funds and the like. Is that the best way to do it, or are we better off just sort of borrowing the money as a government and investing that way?
Well, I think there's lots of ways to the top of the mountain. We sure do need to encourage private investment, and the government's announced a Northern Australian infrastructure facility, which is similar to the strategy announced by Labor. I think we can work with all of these different options. But even when you do attract private investment, I think the key thing is to recognise that you still need a revenue stream there, and you still need something to pay back the private investors. Private investors don't invest in infrastructure out of the goodness of their heart. They want to make money. So there needs to be some kind of fair revenue or other revenue associated with that investment. That'll be fine for some forms of infrastructure, like toll roads. Other forms of infrastructure will require some level of public investment and commitment, and the government is definitely focused on that with a $50 billion forward-looking plan for infrastructure, and I'm sure more to come now under the new Prime Minister.
Malcolm Turnbull's also flagged a bigger tax base, although with lower tax rates. Is that the way to go, do you reckon? Well,
for my sins, I studied economics, David, and that's certainly the ideal, to have a biggest base as possible, so you can pluck the goose with the least amount of squealing with a lower rate. Now, that's always hard to achieve in practice, because you've got to take into account of people's circumstances. Particularly are mindful of making sure people on low incomes and older Australians who may not have a strong cash flow, they may be asset rich but not cash rich, are not unfairly disadvantaged. I'm in the Nationals Party, and we represent actually the poorest people in our society. Our voters have the lowest incomes in Australia, and I'm very mindful to make sure any tax changes don't disadvantage them.
He's also talked about, in times of surplus, and yes, this is a long way off as things are at the moment, but that governments should invest in sovereign wealth funds rather than giving people the money back through tax cuts and the like, as John Howard did. What's your approach to that? Do you think sort of putting money aside is better than handing it directly back?
Well, I think it depends for what reason you've got the money, if you like. I mean, if you think about your own life, if you won the lotto, yeah, you'd be well-minded to put some of that money away for the future rather than spend it all at once. If you got a permanent increase in your pay, well, you would perhaps spend some of that now while saving some of it for the future. So it depends where the revenue source comes from. Now, there is a case to be made that in the last mining boom, which was a bit like Australia winning the lotto, we didn't put enough money aside. The Treasury Secretary said that this week at Senate estimates, and I think that's a fair argument. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think notwithstanding the fact we probably could have put more money aside, Australia as a country put more money aside in the Howard and Costello years than any other similar nation across the world, and that put us in a very strong position going into the global financial crisis. But we must learn the lessons from that period, and if God blesses us with another mining boom, we should perhaps take account of those lessons in the future.
Malcolm Turnbull's made it clear that he considers himself to be a reformer, and he plans to put those words into action. And Paul Kelly in The Australian today likens Malcolm Turnbull's style to that of Bob Hawke, that he seeks to unify rather than divide in order to achieve those sorts of reforms. How do you think he's going a month on and in sort of achieving that? It's early days, obviously.
Well, I think it is early days, David, and I don't think it's sensible for me or other politicians to navel gaze or commentate on our own performance. We've just got to get our head down and do good things for the Australian people. It's a bit like, being out in the middle of the cricket field. You don't start writing the next day's report while you're batting. You focus on facing each ball and making as much runs as you can. And that's what we should do. I'll let others judge, how well I do and how well Malcolm does. We've just got to focus on doing the right thing.
One of the areas where a few strains with the Nationals, your party, have emerged is same-sex marriage. It seems that there won't be any legislation now before the election for a plebiscite that would be triggered, if a plebiscite got out after the election. But should we settle, do you reckon, on a question before the election, or even a bill, as some have suggested?
Well, I certainly think obviously before the plebiscite we'll have to settle on the question. That would be a bit strange.
Yeah, I mean before the election, I'm sorry.
Before the election, look, I'm not too fussed on the timing of that. I certainly think we should have not just the question defined, but the legislation and the bill, because it's commonly known that I don't support a change to the Marriage Act. If we were to change the Marriage Act, I have serious concerns about the current proposal from my colleague Warren Edge. Particularly concerns about how it fails to protect people's freedom of religion and belief, and they are fundamental rights that I think it's only fair that we tell the Australian people exactly what is envisaged to change if a yes vote succeeds, because I am deeply uncomfortable about outsourcing the fundamental rights of people, including their freedom of religion, to some kind of tyranny of the majority. I don't think actually that's a question to be settled through a plebiscite or a majority view. We have a country that's based on some inalienable rights that people have, including their right to have free expression of their own beliefs, their own thoughts and their own religious beliefs. And I have said that I will absolutely respect the decision of the Australian people here in terms of changing the Marriage Act. But I will also do so in a way, or try to do so in a way, that protects people's fundamental rights.
Matt Canavan, thank you so much for your time this morning. We're out of time. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, David. Cheers, mate.
And that's all we've got time for Saturday Agenda. Thanks for watching. The news is up next with